Welcome to the Arizona Clinical Informatics Educational Series on Cerner Power Chart, Lesson Number 5, Medication History, Part 2. Continuing on from Lesson 5, Part 1 on Medication History, we want to briefly touch upon the iatrogenic events again. When a patient acquires a new illness or is injured due to the services provided by a medical provider, the result is considered to be iatrogenic. The key to the definition is that a new medical problem has cropped up as a result of the actions of the medical provider. An iatrogenic event is a form of a medical error. These mistakes are never intended, of course, but they are no less harmful to the patient. We need to understand what causes these events and what we can do to reduce them in our future. Omitted, incorrectly entered data, and duplicates in the initial medication history are some of those leading causes of the iatrogenic events in patients. In our last lesson, Part 1, we discussed these errors and how to avoid them. Now in this first part of this lesson, we want to talk about redundancy, which is the practice of double-checking the medication history, which greatly reduces these adverse events from occurring. Nurses and pharmacists have to take the responsibility for performing this before the reconciling physician reviews the medication history. Part of the pre-described need for a redundancy in verifying medication history is the process of checking and rechecking the information entered into the Document Medication by History section. There are varying examples of verification of the medication history. Not all will occur, though, on every patient. Example number 1, patient admitted through ED. ED nurses address the home meds, but the patient does not remember all of the medications. The med history would be incomplete. Prior to selecting the Document History button, the ED nurse should be selecting the box beside the sentence that states, "Leave med history incomplete, finish later." Here we see the medication history with the historical home meds appearing. In this example, the ED nurse was not able to reconcile the home med history with the patient as the patient was unresponsive and no family members were present. The ED nurse has entered into documents by medication by history and will address the home medication documentation. Because the ED-RN wasn't able to discuss the home medications with the patient, the nurse would need to select the box next to Leave Med History Incomplete, Finish Later, selecting this section, before selecting the Document History button. This will leave the med history in the reconciliation status showing the blue circle with the exclamation mark, indicating to the next nurse that the med histories is incomplete and still needs to be addressed by them. In our second example, the patient transfers from another unit to the floor with a med history showing as completed, but the admission med reconciliation by the provider is not yet complete. The nurse sees this on the reconciliation status bar, which is shown here. The receiving nurse needs to enter the Document Medication by History section, reset, review, and adjust if needed, and then select the Document History button again. Here's the steps, and you'll only need to do these if the physician provider hasn't completed the admission medication reconciliation yet. Select the Document Medication by History button, or you can go through Care Compass if the adult admission history is incomplete. You'll perform a reset. Reset the reconciliation status by right-clicking over Meds History and selecting the word Reset. This will change med histories from a complete status to an incomplete. You'll review all the medications listed, looking for accuracy, compliance, last dose date and time, and etc. As you review the data, you're reviewing for duplicates, missing compliances, incomplete data, and etc. Look at this example. What do you see wrong with it? The nurse who entered it didn't do the compliance and the last dose date and time. As a part of this review, the nurse would then need to complete this missing portion. This is called adjust, where the nurse adjusts anything that is missing or incorrect, or if anything new needs added. Once finished, they would select the Document History button. The nurse has finished adjusting the data and is now complete with the medication history review. So there were 3 steps involved here: reset, review, and adjust. After review is completed, you'll see that the med history is now complete again in the reconciliation status. By following the previous examples, the Cerner system records the flow and the review of the nurse's in and out of medication history. This gives us a snapshot of the changes and also helps us protect our patients from those iatrogenic events. So how does the nurse know if this transfer verification history has been reviewed? They can go to the medication history snapshot and, working from the bottom to the top, see the transitioning of the entry and review process. Now, we want to transition to the medication reconciliations. Though what follows isn't the nursing functionality, the nurse is responsible in reminding the attending physician or provider that the medication reconciliations need completed on their patients. Briefly, we'll discuss the procedural overflows of the medication reconciliation process. We already discussed this part in part 1 of this lesson, but here again is a quick overview of the procedural requirements on the home med history process. Remember that home med histories need completed as quickly as possible, preferably within 4 hours from admission order. It is a historical record. No longer applicable meds on the list need completed. Duplicates on the list need voided. Any changes to dose, route, and frequency need modified. And patient compliance and last dose needs completed. Responsible parties include the emergency room nurse, the RN on a unit, a clinical pharmacist, outpatient services, and physicians or provider as situations do arise. For the admission med reconciliation, here are the procedural requirements. Reconciliations occur no later than 24 hours of admission. Carefully consider whether to continue or discontinue each home medication. Review the home medication for accuracy. Medications that require dosage changes should be selected as discontinue, and new orders should be entered. Responsible parties are attending physician or hospitalist, consulting physician should a need arise, and surgeon for outpatient procedures and also should the need arise. For the transfer rec, here are the procedural requirements. Combines all orders, not just medications. For those transferring into or out of an ICU unit, performed prior to or immediately after the transfer, select continue or discontinue on all orders. For post-operative patients transferring to a floor, perform prior to the transfer discharge from the PACU, perform prior to post-operative floor orders initiated, and PACU nursing to discontinue all PACU plans. Responsible parties on transfer recs are the transferring physician, would be the ICU transfers, or the transferring surgeons on post-operative transfers. For the discharge medication reconciliation, here are the procedural requirements. The reconciliation occurs prior to discharge, but can occur no earlier than 24 hours before the discharge. Select continue or discontinue or prescribe for all medications. All new prescriptions must be entered prior to signing. This is so the data shows on the discharge instructions. Patient shouldn't be discharged without a reconciliation completion. Responsible parties include the discharging provider and our hospitalist. Now that we've completed the procedural overview, let's move into the medication reconciliation performance process. Obviously, as we discussed in the last lesson, the nurse has to complete the home medication history before the medication reconciliations can begin. We've already talked several times about the reconciliation status bar, but I want to cover the symbols once more for clarity purposes. The blue circle with the exclamation mark means nothing's been attempted or not attempted. Green check mark means complete. 3 blue arrows in a circle means in process or incomplete. First and foremost is the admission med rec process. Admission med recs are performed from the Orders In page, the menu tab. Locate the reconciliation section and select it. Once selected, a drop-down appears. Selecting admission will take the provider to the admission med rec. Let's look at the process on the chart. Here's the provider open to the Orders In page and is reviewing the home med history by looking at the last documented on information. The provider has located the reconciliation section and now selects admission. The admission reconciliation screen will pop up. On this screen there are two columns. The one to the left is orders prior to reconciliation, and the one to the right will be orders after reconciliation. Various icons are noted within this section. The scroll equals home medications. The pill bottle is a medication that is a home medication but a recently prescribed one on a previous visit. The hospital is an in-house order that has occurred since admission. The orange circle with the white asterisk indicates that this medication needs addressed in order to complete the Med Rec. The green arrow play button, continue this medication, and the stop button means to stop this medication. Once inside a reconciliation, the provider clicks on the green arrow to continue a medication or the red box to stop a medication. Once fully completed with the selections to continue or discontinue, the provider selects the Reconcile and Sign button. Once an admission Med Rec is complete, the reconciliation bar status of admission will change to a completed status, the green check mark. We'll now transition to the transfer rec process. The transfer reconciliation works just like the admission Med Rec, except instead of just medications, the provider is addressing all of the active orders on the chart. Of note, the transfer rec needs performed prior to entering and activating any new order sets, else the provider will be required to address all new orders as well in that reconciliation process. Here's a screenshot of the transfer reconciliation pop-up. There are two columns, order prior to reconciliation and orders after reconciliation. All orders are divided by headers, medications, radiology, laboratory, and etc. Once inside a reconciliation, click on the green arrow to continue an order or the red box to stop an order. Items default to either continue or stop based upon previous order statuses and can be changed as the provider desires. On all orders except for medications, there is an all icon in both the continue and stop columns that allows you to continue or stop all orders in that header. Transfer recs are only performed at certain times of the patient's stay. Once fully completed, with the selections to continue or discontinue, the provider selects the Reconcile and Sign button. Here's a screenshot with the continue and stop boxes and the all icons highlighted. Going back to our demo patient, you see that the provider has completed the transfer rec and has selected under reconciliation history the transfer rec, which is displayed in the section to the right. We'll now transition to the Discharge Med Rec process. The Discharge Med Rec works just like the admission Med Rec, except in the addition to the continue and stop option, you also have a prescribe option. The provider will be performing the Discharge Med Rec from D part. As in other reconciliations, there are two columns, order prior to reconciliation and orders after reconciliation. If there is a home med listed and an in-house med, and they are of the same dosage and indication, the provider would need to continue the home medication. If the provider needs a prescription on the listed medication, they would select the radio button under the prescribe column. IVs and IV piggybacks will not allow for action. In order to prescribe one, they must select the plus add button. Any new prescription, written or e-prescribed, requires addition to the Discharge Med Rec in order to show on the patient's discharge education. Select the plus add button to add any new prescriptions. Select the send to route on all newly prescribed meds and complete the dose, route, frequency, duration, dispense, and refill sections of each prescription. Once fully completed with the selections to continue or discontinue, the provider selects the Reconcile and Sign button. As states transition to electronically prescribed controlled substances, the amount of written orders or prescriptions should reduce considerably. Notice on the prescribed medication that there is a missing detail that is required. This will need to be completed before it can be saved. The provider can adjust the dose, route, frequency, duration, dispense amount, and refills. All of this is role and privilege dependent. Yet a provider can send electronically to a preferred pharmacy, print, or select a do not route option. They would need to choose one to complete the prescription. Upon completion of the Discharge Med Rec, the reconciliation status will change to a green check mark. Here in our demo patient, we can see the provider has selected a Discharge Med Rec under reconciliation history and is viewing the data in the right-hand section. All medications prescribed, continued, and stopped will show in the patient's discharge instructions. The mPage of Discharge Summary also shows you the Discharge Med Reconciliation. This concludes Lesson 5, Part 2 of the Medication History and Reconciliation Status. Up next is Lesson number 6, the Interdisciplinary Care Plan.